The Grand Elysian Hotel was not a place of noise. It was a cathedral of wealth, where sound was absorbed by thick Persian rugs and the hushed reverence of its patrons. Sunlight, filtered through colossal arched windows, landed on the marble floors in silent golden pools, making the polished stone gleam like a frozen river. In the center of the lobby, a place of honor was reserved for a Bosendorfer grand piano, its ebony finish so deep and lustrous it seemed to drink the light around it. It sat not as an instrument, but as a declaration of a world far removed from the grit and struggle of the city outside. Elias Vance moved through this silent world like a ghost. His uniform, the simple gray attire of the hotel's maintenance staff, was designed to make him invisible. A functioning part of the scenery no more worthy of notice than a brass door handle or a potted fern. He was an old man, with hands calloused from a life of work and eyes that held a deep, quiet sorrow. He emptied a delicate porcelain ashtray into a dustbin, his movements slow and deliberate, a habit learned over years of making himself small. His gaze, however, was often drawn to the piano. It was more than an object of beauty to him. It was a memory, a vessel of what he had lost. He saw his daughter, Lily, her small hands dancing over imaginary keys, her face lit with a pure, unblemished joy. The music she would have made, the life she would have lived, it all resided there, in the silent potential of that magnificent instrument. He felt its pull like a phantom limb, an ache for a life that was no longer his. Julian Thorne did not walk. He conquered. He swept into the lobby of the Grand Elysian like a storm front, his presence preceded by the sharp, expensive click of his handmade Italian shoes on the marble. He wore a suit of charcoal gray so perfectly tailored it seemed less like fabric and more like a second, superior skin. On his wrist, a watch glittered with the cold, hard light of diamonds, a manacle of success. He was a man who saw the world not as a place to live, but as a balance sheet to be dominated. The hotel, this very building, was his next target, a jewel he intended to pry from its setting and add to his crown. His eyes, the color of chips of ice, scanned the lobby with a predator's casual disdain. He saw the bowing staff, the deferential glances from other guests, the silent testament to his power. And then, his gaze snagged on Elias. He saw the worn uniform, the stooped shoulders, the tired resignation in the old man's face. To Julian, Elias was not a person. He was a defect, a piece of grime on the otherwise pristine canvas of his world, a symbol of the weakness he so thoroughly despised. A flicker of contempt, thin as a paper cut, crossed his lips. He thought of the world in simple terms. There were owners, and there were things to be owned. This man was a thing. Julian was flanked by two younger men, associates who orbited him like nervous moons. Their laughter was a little too loud, their nods a little too eager. They were here to witness his triumph. The final meeting before his hostile takeover of the Elysian Hotel Group was complete. He was in a performative mood, eager to demonstrate the totality of his power. He saw Elias pause, his gaze lingering on the Bosendorfer. A cruel amusement sparked in Julian's mind. It was perfect. A perfect opportunity for a little theater. "Look at that," Julian said, his voice a low sneer meant for his companions, but loud enough to carry in the hushed lobby. The help dreaming of things they can never have. "It's pathetic, isn't it?" His associates chuckled, the sound obsequious and sharp. Elias heard the comment. He had learned long ago to let such things wash over him. Words were just air. They could not touch the core of his grief, the one true thing he carried with him always. He turned to continue his duties. to retreat back into his invisibility. But Julian was not finished. He thrived on confrontation, on forcing the world to bend to his will. He strode forward, his entourage trailing behind him. The air grew colder as he approached. He stopped directly in front of Elias, forcing the older man to look at him. The contrast was stark. The billionaire in his armor of wealth, and the cleaner in his shroud of humility. Several guests in the lobby paused, their conversations dying as they sensed the impending drama. An audience was forming. "You," Julian said, the word a shard of glass. "You like the piano?" Elias met his gaze. There was no fear in his eyes, only a weariness that seemed ancient. "It is a beautiful instrument, sir." His voice was quiet, respectful. Julian let out a short, barking laugh that held no humor. "A beautiful instrument for beautiful people. Not for this." He gestured vaguely at Elias's entire being, a dismissal of his very existence. He turned to his primary associate, a man named Carter, whose ambition made him cruel. "Carter, I'm feeling generous today. A lesson in economics for the lower classes." Julian reached into his jacket and pulled out a money clip. It was thick with $100 bills. The sight of it made the air in the lobby feel thin. He peeled off a single bill and held it out. "This is for you," he said to Carter, but his eyes were locked on Elias, pinning him in place. Then he smiled, a predator's baring of teeth. "And I'll give you $200,000, he announced, his voice ringing through the silent space, "if you slap this homeless man." The proposal hung in the air, grotesque and obscene. The gathered onlookers gasped. Some looked away in shame. Others leaned in, their faces alight with a morbid fascination. The world had stopped. It was a tableau of cruelty, with Julian as the grand conductor. Carter hesitated for only a fraction of a second. His face, usually a mask of sycophantic eagerness, paled slightly. But then he looked at Julian, at the sheer, unassailable power in his eyes, and he saw his future. He saw the promotions, the bonuses, the entry into the inner circle. He saw $200,000. His morality, a flimsy thing at best, evaporated. He took the $100 bill from Julian's hand. "A down payment," Julian said with a smirk. Carter turned to face Elias. The old man stood perfectly still, his back straight. He did not beg. He did not plead. He simply watched Carter approach, his expression unreadable. To Elias, this was just another wave in an ocean of indignities he had weathered since losing everything. This humiliation was nothing compared to the silence in his empty home, nothing compared to the memory of a doctor's solemn face. Carter took a deep breath, the crisp scent of Julian's cologne filling his nostrils. He was an actor on a stage, and the director was a man who could make or break him. He raised his hand. The light from the chandelier caught the gold of his signet ring. The slap was meant to be a performance, a sharp, theatrical crack that would echo in the silent lobby and seal his loyalty to Julian Thorne. But it never landed. "Stop." The voice was not loud, but it cut through the tension with the authority of a judge's gavel. It came from the grand entrance. A man in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair and a bearing of quiet command, was walking toward them. He wore a simple but exquisitely cut suit, and his eyes were fixed on the scene with an expression of profound disappointment. It was Mr. Abernathy, the chief executive officer of the Elysian Hotel Group. Julian's smirk faltered. Abernathy was a relic, a man from a bygone era of handshakes and honor, the last obstacle to his takeover. He had underestimated the old man's presence. Abernathy ignored Julian completely. He walked past Carter, whose hand was still frozen in midair, and stopped in front of Elias. His entire demeanor changed. The stern CEO melted away, replaced by a man showing deep, genuine concern. "Mr. Vance," Abernathy said, his voice warm with respect. "I am so dreadfully sorry. I was delayed in traffic. Are you all right? Did this person harm you?" The lobby, already silent, seemed to hold its breath. A collective confusion rippled through the onlookers. "Mr. Vance?" The CEO was addressing the cleaner as Mr. Vance. Julian's mind stalled. The name meant nothing to him. He stepped forward, his arrogance warring with a sudden prickling unease. "Abernathy, what is the meaning of this? I am in the middle of a business transaction. Do not interfere with my staff." He gestured dismissively at Carter. Abernathy turned to face Julian, and the warmth in his eyes was replaced by a glacial cold. "Your staff? This man is not your staff, and you are not in the middle of a transaction. You are in the middle of committing an unforgivable offense on private property." "Don't be absurd," Julian scoffed, trying to regain control. "This is a vagrant, a cleaner. I was simply—" "You were simply what, Mr. Thorne?" Abernathy interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "Revealing the true nature of your character for all to see? I think we have seen enough." He took a half step to the side, placing himself beside Elias, a silent gesture of allegiance that sent a shockwave through the room. "Julian Thorne," Abernathy said, his voice now ringing with a formal, damning clarity. "Allow me to introduce you. This is Elias Vance." He paused, letting the name hang in the air before delivering the final, devastating blow. "He is the silent majority shareholder of the Elysian Hotel Group, the company his father founded. He is the man whose approval you have been so desperately seeking for your acquisition." Abernathy's eyes narrowed. "He is, for all intents and purposes, the man who owns this building. And you just offered your sniveling subordinate $200,000 to assault him." The world fractured. For Julian Thorne, the polished marble floor seemed to drop away, plunging him into a bottomless abyss. The words did not compute. They were nonsense, a language from an alien world. The cleaner? The old, invisible man? The owner? His mind reeled, a frantic, panicked scramble to reassemble a reality that had just been shattered into a million pieces. He looked at Elias, truly looked at him for the first time. He saw the calm, steady eyes, the quiet dignity that was not born of servitude, but of something far deeper, something unassailable. He saw power, a power he had not recognized because it was not loud or cruel or gilded in gold. The investors who had been fawning over him moments before now looked at him with expressions of pure horror. Their faces were pale masks of disbelief. They began to subtly distance themselves, inching away as if he were suddenly radioactive. Carter looked as if he had been turned to stone, his hand still hovering in the air like a grotesque statue, his face a canvas of dawning, catastrophic realization. The $200,000 was no longer a prize. It was the price of his own destruction. Section, the onlookers whispered, a sibilant rush of scandal filling the void. Phones were already emerging, small black mirrors held up to capture the billionaire's spectacular fall from grace. But Elias did not look at Julian. He did not revel in the man's sudden and total humiliation. He paid no mind to the shocked faces or the frantic whispers. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to Mr. Abernathy, a silent thank you. Then he did the last thing anyone expected. He walked toward the Bosendorfer grand piano. He moved with a grace that belied his age and his simple clothes. He sat down on the polished bench, the worn gray fabric of his trousers a stark contrast to the gleaming ebony. For a moment, he just sat there, his calloused fingers hovering over the pristine ivory keys. He closed his eyes, and the chaotic scene in the lobby faded away. He was no longer in a hotel. He was in his living room years ago. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. And Lily, his Lily, was at his side, her head on his shoulder, listening as he played. He began. The first note was soft, hesitant, like a question asked of the universe. Then another followed, and another, weaving together into a melody of such profound and heartbreaking beauty that it seized the very air in the room. It was not a famous classical piece. It was something raw, something personal. A composition born from the deepest well of human experience. It was a song of love, of loss, of a grief so vast it could swallow stars. Section, the music flowed from him, a torrent of emotion that silenced every whisper, every thought. It spoke of sunny afternoons and bedtime stories, of a small hand tucked into a large one, of a laughter that was now just an echo in an empty house. It was the sound of a father's shattered heart, rendered into perfect, devastating harmony. The notes filled the grand lobby, washing over the marble and the crystal and the stunned, silent people. It cleansed the space of the ugliness that had just occurred, replacing it with something sacred. In the corner of the lobby, a distinguished-looking man with a neatly trimmed beard and glasses felt tears welling in his eyes. He was Arthur Finch, the foremost music critic for the city's most prestigious newspaper, there to review the hotel's new restaurant. He did not know who this old man in a cleaner's uniform was, but he knew, with the certainty of a life dedicated to the art, that he was listening to a genius. This was not the performance of a hobbyist. It was the soul-bearing of a master, a talent that belonged in the grandest concert halls of the world. Julian Thorne stood frozen, imprisoned by the music. Each note was a hammer blow against the walls he had built around his heart. The melody bypassed his arrogance, his wealth, his power. It went straight to the small, broken place inside him that he had hidden from the world for decades. It spoke a language of pain he understood all too well, a language he had tried to bury under mountains of money. The final chord hung in the air, shimmering with unresolved sorrow, before slowly, gently, fading into nothing. Silence returned to the lobby. But it was a different kind of silence now. It was not the empty hush of wealth, but a heavy, reverent quiet, filled with the ghost of the music. Elias opened his eyes. He looked not at the crowd, but at the keys, as if saying a final goodbye to the memory he had just conjured. Arthur Finch, the critic, was the first to move. He walked forward, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. He stopped a few feet from the piano, addressing not Elias, but the room at large. I don't know what I just heard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That was not merely playing. That was a confession, a prayer, a piece of such staggering emotional depth. It rivals Chopin. It surpasses Liszt." "Whoever you are, sir," he said, now looking directly at Elias, "you are a master." This public declaration, from such an unimpeachable source, was the final nail in Julian's coffin. He had not just tried to humiliate a rich man. He had tried to silence a genius. He had mistaken a king for a pauper, a priceless diamond for a piece of gravel. Mr. Abernathy stepped forward again, his expression grim. "The board meeting is, of course, cancelled. Your offer for the Elysian Group is hereby, and with extreme prejudice, rejected, Mr. Thorne." He gestured to two uniformed security guards who had materialized near the entrance. "These gentlemen will escort you from the premises. Your presence is no longer welcome here. Not now. Not ever." The investors, seeing their last chance to salvage their own reputations, turned on Julian as one. "Thorne, you're finished," one of them hissed, his face contorted in a mask of fury. "Our partnership is dissolved. You'll be hearing from our lawyers." They scattered like rats from a sinking ship, leaving Julian alone in the center of the room, the target of dozens of accusing, contemptuous stares. The guards took his arms, their grips firm but professional. As they led him away, a disgraced emperor being marched out of his own conquered territory, his eyes met Elias's for one last moment. In Elias's gaze, Julian did not see triumph. He did not see anger or hatred. He saw only a profound, bottomless pity. And that was the most devastating blow of all. It was the look one gives to a man who has already lost everything of value long before he ever lost his money. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Before Julian had even reached the curb, the story was a wildfire on social media. A video, shaky but clear, of his cruel offer and Abernathy's stunning rebuke was going viral. The headlines wrote themselves: "Billionaire tyrant tries to buy hotel, humiliates secret owner." "The Cleaner and the King. Julian Thorne's epic downfall." By morning, the stock of Thorne Industries had plummeted. His board of directors convened an emergency meeting and summarily fired him from the company he had built. Business partners severed ties. Banks called in their loans. The empire of ice and steel that Julian had constructed over a lifetime crumbled into dust in less than 24 hours. He was ruined. Not just financially, but reputationally. He was a pariah, a cartoon villain in a morality tale told and retold in 1,000 news cycles. But for Julian, the public shame was a dull roar compared to the sound that echoed ceaselessly in his mind. The haunting melody of Elias's piano. It was the soundtrack to his ruin, a song of sorrow that had somehow become his own. It dredged up memories he had spent his life suppressing, the guilt he had entombed in vaults of gold. A week later, stripped of his company, his fortune, and his pride, Julian did something he hadn't done in 30 years. He asked for help. He called Mr. Abernathy, his voice a hoarse, broken whisper, and begged for a meeting with Elias Vance. They met not in a grand hotel or a sterile corporate office, but in a small, quiet coffee shop in a part of town Julian had only ever driven through with his windows up. The air smelled of roasted beans and rain. Elias was already there, sitting at a small table by the window, nursing a cup of black coffee. He wore a simple coat, not a cleaner's uniform, but the clothes of an ordinary man. Julian approached the table, a ghost in a suit that now seemed too large for him. He sat down, the silence between them heavy and thick. Julian began, but the words caught in his throat. What could he say? Sorry? The word was a pebble against a mountain of his own making. He looked at the man across from him, this man he had tried to break, and saw no malice. It was disarming. He had come prepared for a lecture, for recriminations, for a final, victorious condemnation. He was not prepared for this quiet, patient grace. I don't understand you, Julian finally managed to say. You had everything. Power, wealth beyond measure. Why were you working as a cleaner? Elias took a slow sip of his coffee. He looked out the rain-streaked window for a long moment before answering. After my daughter, after she was gone, he said, his voice soft. The money meant nothing. The houses, the company, they were just empty rooms. filled with echoes. I wanted to be invisible. I wanted a simple job, a reason to get up in the morning. I wanted to be somewhere she would have loved. She loved that piano. He paused. Being a cleaner, it kept me grounded. It reminded me that at the end of the day, we are all just people. Some of us clean up messes. Some of us make them. The simple, profound truth of the statement hit Julian with the force of a physical blow. He had spent his entire life making messes, leaving a wake of human wreckage behind him, all in the pursuit of a world so clean and orderly that no pain could ever touch him. Driven by an impulse he didn't understand, a desperate need to make this man see him, to make him understand the rot at his own core, Julian began to confess. "I wasn't born like this," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the tabletop. "I grew up with nothing. We lived in a tiny apartment, 4 of us. My father worked himself to death in a factory. I was small, and I was scared. The other kids, they beat me. They mocked my worn-out clothes. I swore I would never be weak again. I swore I would build a fortress of money so high that no one could ever hurt me." He looked up, and there were tears in his eyes, a sight so foreign to his own face that it felt like a betrayal. "It worked. I got rich. I got powerful. But the fortress became a prison. I couldn't let anyone in, especially not myself. The only person I ever truly loved was my younger sister, Clara. She was like the music you played. Pure. Good." His voice broke. "When I made my first million, I bought a sports car. I was so proud. I wanted to show her. I took her for a drive. I was going too fast, showing off, being the big man I always wanted to be. I lost control on a wet road. She died instantly. It was my fault, all my fault." He finally choked out the confession that had poisoned his soul for decades. "I ran. I built my empire on her memory, telling myself that if I became powerful enough, it would somehow make up for it. That if I owned the world, it would erase the fact that I had destroyed hers. Your music. It sounded like how I felt that day. It sounded like her." Elias listened, his expression unchanged. The story was tragic, but it was a familiar one. When left to fester, often turned to poison. When Julian finished, the silence returned, thick with the weight of 2 lifetimes of sorrow. Then, Elias reached into his wallet. He pulled out a photograph, its edges softened and creased with time. It was a picture of a young woman with a bright, luminous smile and eyes that sparkled with life. It was Lily. "My daughter was a musician," Elias said softly, pushing the photo across the table. "She was studying at the conservatory. She was on her way home from a late-night practice session. A car, going far too fast, lost control on a rain-slicked road. A hit and run. The driver was never found." Julian stared at the photograph. A cold dread, colder than any financial ruin, began to creep up his spine. The face was unfamiliar, but the story was a nightmare echo of his own. "When?" Julian whispered, his voice trembling. "When did this happen?" 5 years ago, Elias said. "November 10th, just after midnight, on the corner of 8th and Elm." Julian's world dissolved. November 10th. The corner of 8th and Elm. The rain. The sickening crunch of metal. The scream that he had tried to forget for 5 years. He had told himself it was just a fender bender, that the other driver was fine, that he had to get away before the police came and his whole life ended. He had run. He had run and never looked back. He looked from the smiling face in the photograph to the grieving father sitting across from him, the man whose life he had destroyed, the man he had tried to humiliate in the lobby. The fated, terrible connection between them snapped into place, a chain forged in tragedy and arrogance. "It was me," Julian choked out, the words tasting like ash. "Oh God, it was me." The confession hung in the small cafe, a truth so monstrous it seemed to suck all the air from the room. Elias stared at him, his face finally, for the first time, registering a flicker of shock, a deep and profound horror. The man responsible for his daughter's death, the source of his unending pain, was the same man who had stood before him in the lobby, dripping with contempt. The universe, in its infinite cruelty and irony, had brought them together in the most theatrical, agonizing way imaginable. Julian, completely shattered, he slumped forward, his head in his hands, and sobbed. They were not the tears of a ruined billionaire, but the racking, gut-wrenching sobs of a damned soul finally facing its sin. "I'll turn myself in," he wept. "I'll confess to everything. I deserve to be in prison. I deserve to rot." Elias looked at the broken man before him. For a fleeting moment, a wave of pure, white-hot hatred washed over him. He wanted to see Julian suffer. He wanted him to feel a fraction of the pain he had felt every single day for 5 years. Revenge was there, a gleaming, perfect sword, ready for him to wield. But then he looked at the photograph of Lily. He saw her smile. She had been a creature of forgiveness, of light. Revenge would not honor her. It would only create more darkness. What would Lily want? He thought of the music, the song he had written for her. It was a song of sorrow, yes, but it was also a song of love. And love did not demand an eye for an eye. Slowly, deliberately, Elias reached across the table and placed his hand on Julian's shoulder. The touch was startling. Julian flinched, then looked up, his face a mess of tears and self-loathing. "Our prison will not bring her back," Elias said, his voice impossibly steady. "Your ruin serves no one. It is just more wreckage." "Then what?" Julian pleaded. "What can I do? There is nothing I can do to fix this." "You cannot fix it," Elias agreed. "But you can honor her. You can build something instead of breaking it. A life lived in her name. That might be a form of justice." And so, a new path was chosen, not of vengeance, but of redemption. Julian, guided by Elias, liquidated every remaining asset he had. The last vestiges of his broken empire, the offshore accounts, the art collections, the penthouses, were all sold off. It amounted to a staggering sum, the final echo of his former power. But the money was not used to rebuild his fortune. Together, they established the Lily Vance Foundation for Young Musicians. Its mission was simple and profound: to provide instruments, scholarships, and world-class instruction to underprivileged children who dreamed of making music. It was a foundation built not on profit, but on the belief that talent should never be silenced by poverty. Julian suggested the ultimate act of penance. "You should run it," he told Elias. "It is your daughter's legacy. You should be its face, its heart." He paused. "And I will work for you, anonymously. I will manage the finances, the paperwork. I will serve her memory by serving you. It is the only thing I have left to offer." Elias agreed. It was a fitting, poignant justice. The man who had valued only money would now spend the rest of his days managing it in the service of the man he had wronged, forever bound to the memory of the girl he had killed. 2 years passed. The foundation thrived. It became a beacon of hope in the city, its concert halls filled with the sounds of children discovering their own voices through music. The annual foundation gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Elysian Hotel. The room was not filled with billionaires and investors, but with proud parents, excited children, and patrons of the arts. Elias Vance stood in the wings of the stage, watching a 12-year-old girl play the piano. She was playing his song, Lily's song, but in her hands, it was not just a song of sorrow. It was a song of hope, of a future filled with possibility. A gentle, peaceful smile touched Elias's lips. He had found his purpose again, not in the silence of grief, but in the glorious noise of creation. He glanced toward the back of the hall. He saw Julian. He was no longer the titan in the bespoke suit. He was just a man, dressed in simple, practical clothes, quietly directing volunteers and checking seating charts. He looked older, humbled, the arrogance stripped from him, leaving behind something quieter, more thoughtful. He caught Elias's eye and offered a small, respectful nod. It was a gesture of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of their strange, intertwined journey. Later that evening, after the last of the guests had departed, Elias walked onto the stage and addressed the empty hall, though his words were meant for the world. We are often told that a person's worth is measured by what they accumulate, he said, his voice resonating in the quiet space. Their wealth, their power, their possessions. But I have come to learn that this is a lie. True wealth is not found in a bank account, but in the human heart. It is measured in kindness, in forgiveness, and in the courage to seek a second chance. It is measured in the beauty we choose to create in a world that is so often filled with pain. He walked over to the piano, the same magnificent Bösendorfer from that fateful day in the lobby. He sat down, his hands finding the familiar keys. "This is for you, Lily," he whispered, and he began to play. The music that filled the hall was not the sound of a broken heart, but of a mended one. It was a melody of love, of grace, and of the profound, unshakable truth that even in the deepest darkness, a single note of hope can create a symphony of light.